Further ado, Chad Tinkle.
I'm a short man, sorry. Thank you for letting me come and at least share my experience with EAB in Fort Wayne. We're currently in that exponential death phase right now, so a lot of the stuff I'm going to be talking about, it's coming this way. It will hit, and it's all depending upon how you react now instead of being reactive, being proactive, and at least developing some sort of a plan before this phase hits, because the pictures you're going to see and the type of decisions I'm making really don't have anything to do with treatment of new trees now. Now, we are treating some trees we've been treating since '08, but a lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk about, we're in that exponential death phase. So keep that in mind as I go through some of these. What I like to do when I go somewhere new is I always like to tell you a little bit about my city. I'm just going to click these up here. And basically, it was when I came to speak here, I looked at all the population dynamics, and you were almost identical to Fort Wayne in terms of street tree population. A little bit different on population of individuals, but we have about 51,000 street trees in our city limits. 157 different variety of street trees, and we cover about 1,234 miles of roadway total for street trees. Now that averages out to about 41 trees per mile. We have a population of about 256,000, so we're close. We're very similar to Naperville and with regard to street trees and people. That comes out to about one street tree for every 5 residents, and I'm also in charge of 86 parks that encompass 2,800 acres basically, and all the trees that are in those parks. All right, this is where we came from in terms of EAB. In 2008, prior to the infestation, it was there, we just didn't see it. 14,000 ash trees is what we had. Our first official actually hit was in '06, and it was due to an individual that brought firewood in from Michigan. I directly pinpointed it to a firewood pile not more than 50 feet away from where the first tree was found. We have ash trees planted throughout our entire city. We're about, at that point in time, we were about almost 25% ash as a urban coverage foliage. Now keep in mind, some of our neighborhoods are monoculture as well, 25%. A lot of people say, well, 25% over the whole city, that ain't bad. Well, if you go into certain neighborhoods, they're 80%, 90% ash trees. They're going to lose their entire urban canopy. One of the first neighborhoods we went into had about 90 to 95% ash. And we just moved through there recently, and they only have a handful of trees left. They went from completely shaded streets and homes to full sun. It is a remarkable difference. Where we are today, we are at about 21% ash. Our population is down to about 11,000. That's not including the ones I have marked currently being removed. It's kind of a misnomer there. We went from 14,000 to 11,000, but we marked 4,000 trees this year in 2011. So we're losing 4,000 trees in 2011, and I think we're going to lose probably another 5,000 in 2012. So exponential phase is enormous. And with exponential phase comes exponential problems. Not just removal of trees and stumps and replanting things, but the kind of things that come up out of exponential death of trees is an overwhelming amount of work. There's so many smaller companies that I tried to include into to bring business to our area. They just cannot handle the massive workload of all the removals that we have. And when Dr. Frederick talked about limb shear, and it is a remarkable thing, within less than 12 months after death, these things are dropping scaffold limbs. I mean, they're dropping sheets of bark that are, 3 foot long by 2 foot wide, depending on the size of the tree. So in 11, like I said, about 4,000 ash trees. We're only going to be able to replace about 1,766 there. And that had to do too with a grant. I applied for 2 grants, and I received 2 grants from the Indiana Department of Natural Resources. So I was very fortunate that I received those grants. Other than that number would have dropped dramatically in terms of replanting. You know, when I first submitted the budget, I had a 5-year strategic plan all planned out, great, that it was going to happen, and they kind of giggled at me and they said, yeah, maybe for removal of the trees in 5 years, but your replacement's going to be more like 10. So you consider taking 25% of your canopy out and not being able to replant all of them for 10 years. And also everybody's going through budget cuts. I mean, we're going through budget cuts. Initially, we had quite a bit of money in our budget for EAB. It quickly dwindled because of the other issues that came up with the city. So now we're struggling trying to find out how we're going to fund the removal of probably over 10,000 trees is what it's coming down to. These were my projections. This was a slide I used when I went to City Council. And these were my projections for 2011. Typical year we lose about 500 trees. They died due to natural causes, vehicle accidents, whatever, you know, other insect issues. We proposed we're going to lose 3,670 ash trees. Add that to the 500, we had 4,170 trees we needed to remove in 2011. I currently have 4 full-time employees, and I have 4,000 trees to cut. And we do prune. We're on a 6-year pruning cycle. So what does that mean? That means basically I can handle, if I shut down the entire division doing nothing else but removing trees, I can handle maybe 1,670 a year, and that's an optimistic number. So we had to basically bid out 2,500 additional trees and stumps. So there is no increase in manpower for me or funding really right now. So we have 4 guys working nonstop cutting trees. Now what does that do with the rest of my program? I'm no longer able to prune trees. So I've deferred maintenance. So in terms of storm damage, if anybody else understands storm damage, if you don't prune your trees for an extended period of time, your storm damage is going to increase dramatically. I mean, when we had an ice storm, that ice storm that came through 08, I did a study in our area, in our city. We had a particular area that hadn't been pruned for 7 years, and then we had a particular area that had been pruned in that current year. In the area that had not been pruned, it was a 54% damage rate on trees. The other end, if you would have pruned it that year, 19%. So that's a deferred maintenance issue that's going to come up, and like Dr. Feuer said, it's not in the next 3 to 4 years, that's in the next 10 years. If you have to eliminate everything else you're doing to take care of this problem of exponential death, you will see repercussions for another 10 years beyond. City of Fort Wayne, this is our ash trees, our distribution. We're relatively lucky. I know we do have a lot of ash trees, but the majority of them are relatively small. I know that Toledo has a much bigger population in terms of DBH, so they're a little bit easier to take down, but there still is a lot of them. So this was one of the charts I used. We do have a treatment program. We started treating in 08. I treated 11,000 trees initially throughout the city, and my initial intention was to save the trees. That was, I had the budget. We were going to try to save them. And as obvious things go, budgets dwindled, you know, so we ended up having to reduce the size of our treatments that we did. So we took about a 10%, treated about 1,230 trees. So those are still being treated today. They're still doing fine. So we're hopeful that we can at least save a portion of our trees in Fort Wayne. But this distribution class is one of the tools I use to choose, you know, what type of tree. People say, okay, how do you decide out of 10,000 trees? What are you going to treat? How do you go about that? So this is one of the tools I use, and being politics always plays a role, unfortunately, in everything. So you have different council districts. Everybody's got to be treated equally. So what I did was, initially I started taking white ash was the first ones I chose to treat. Larger ash that provided the more benefits. And then I took this distribution scale and I said, okay, most of my trees fall within the 12 to 16 inch category. So that's what I took out of the green ash, because that allowed me to utilize the least amount of money and spread it out as much as I could, because that's the most popular tree if you want to talk about DBH class. Then I could put as many treated trees and spread it out amongst the city as best I could. And so that was how I went about choosing which trees I wanted to treat. Also, one of the things I did was I initially started saying, okay, which trees do I want to treat? Or how much money do you have initially? Which trees do I want to treat? And then after that, which trees do I not want treated? And I chose that we had a lot of power line issues in Fort Wayne. So I went around and took every single tree that had been pruned because of the power lines, it was too close to the power lines. Every single one of those did not get treated in my city because they're not supposed to be there to begin with, and they were creating another maintenance issue for me. So those trees were ones that I immediately took out, power line issues. This is a population trend that actually, when I first got this dumped in my lap for trying to decide what I was going to do in 2 weeks, I looked at Detroit, and I was looking in the Chicagoland area, and I said, okay, it looks like that this thing is I'm gonna be able to ride this out real nice and easy. I'm gonna keep up with removals, you know. So far I'm doing pretty good. I think we can do that. Well, the red line is really where we're at. Exponential death kicked in about the 4th to 5th year. From pretty much from 08 to 2010, you know, we lost a couple thousand trees, and we were able to keep up with that relatively cool. You know, we did a pretty good job. Well, it went from losing a couple thousand trees over a multi-year period to losing 4,000 trees in one season. I mean, the population of the insect had increased so greatly that it was just massive death immediately, coupled with 2 concurrent droughts that we had just exacerbated the problem even more. So now we're standing with crews are working nonstop, basically 6 days a week trying to get these trees down so we don't have injuries and or other issues that come apart. But that right there is what's going to happen. I mean, the blue line is what everybody thinks that's going to happen. It's a linear death pattern. You're going to be able to keep up, and that is so not the truth at all, because year 4 or 5 is generally when it happens. That exponential death's going to kick in, and you're going to have a heck of a lot of dead trees to take care of, and the resources are going to become very thin. We had to put out a contract for the 4,000 trees or the 2,500 trees. None of the local companies could even keep up with the amount of work that was there. They had a dedicated client base. They didn't want to leave their clients that they had. So we had Asplin Tree Service was the one who got our bid. They're large enough. I was happy that they got it. It was large enough to take care of it. Well, even them being a large company and having a massive amount of employees, they have other contracts to deal with and other places in the region that they're working on. So I just got off the phone with him this morning before I came here, and I said, hey, when are you going to put more crews? He says, well, after the first year I can put more crews in. But you know, they're even struggling as well. And with such a large area in the Chicagoland area, there's going to have a resource issue when this hits. Impacts of EAB, the ones that are obvious is economic, there's environmental, public safety, and political. And political, public safety, unfortunately. Economic is big, everybody, budgets are hit very hard. But for people's jobs and public safety, that is huge, and especially if you've just went through an election, those issues come up.